Have you ever woken up and immediately thought, I want to start some controversy today? Well, today is that day, and I'm partnering up with my friend Ashton, and we're gonna be discussing our picks for the most underrated and overrated MCU movies. Now granted, this is gonna be split into 2 episodes, so make sure you tune in for part 2. Ashton, are you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and start with our most underrated MCU movie. Ashton, take the lead.
All right, I got Age of Ultron. Okay, this is a movie that I did see in theaters, and I enjoyed this movie basically from the first time I watched it. I mean, it was just, okay, versus all the other Avengers movies, you see all the heroes together for most of the movie. Okay, so but when you look at Infinity War and Endgame, for instance, we see a lot of times they're like all over the place, and it's kind of jumping from different characters. But I think at their best, like Avengers, the first original Avengers, and then Avengers Age of Ultron, both of those movies we get to see them together. Obviously, the original one isn't underrated because everybody kind of likes that movie.
It's an OG, yeah.
So
who hates that
otherwise,
movie?
I'd probably put that one. But Age of Ultron is one that I feel like is not really that liked. It's probably the worst Avengers movie, even though it's underrated. Still, I would probably put it as the worst Avengers movie, but it is definitely, I think, higher up on the list than most people would say. So I'm just gonna jump into some pros that I wrote down. I went ahead and watched the movie, and one of the pros is it jumps right into the action. Like if you go on Disney Plus right now and play it, it's just like boom, right there. Like they're already just in it. And I mean, it's kind of a pro and a con, so I'm a little bit mixed on that, but I think it is a pro in a way because it gets your attention right away, and you're just like right there. You're in it already in the battle. There is no
well, they're working together. They're all working in perfect harmony.
And it's it's jumping from character to character in a really cool way. Really cool. And also my second note here is we got to see the actual cool Hulk in that movie. I think that might be one of the last movies where Hulk is actually cool. Like after that, it kind of just goes downhill, but I think he's really cool, and especially the opening scene there, like just going crazy.
Hashtag bring back cool Hulk, please.
Yeah, please. I would definitely pay to see that again. Definitely nothing like that old Hulk. I'll say that. I did enjoy that. I think the first Avengers was peak Hulk.
Oh yeah,
for sure. Very cool and natural introduction of the twins, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. They're just kind of like there, and it's a little bit mysterious. You don't know what's going on. Like, there's people running around all over the place.
Well, if you're a comic fan, then you know that in the comics there are Magneto's kids. And so I'm sure a bunch of the comic book fans, when they got into the theaters, are like, wait, why are you going to introduce these guys and not give us Magneto? And so I could see a lot of the hardcore comic book fans being mad because it seemed like another bait and switch, which I think there probably is plans to introduce the X-Men in the future. But I agree with you that like with what they had, they did a great job of kind of slowly introducing them.
Right. And obviously, like I've told Jonah this before, but I'm not somebody that's been into the comics, so I'm kind of just like a exclusive movie guy. So it is an interesting perspective, probably not the better one according to most people, but like I'm just, I've only seen the movies, so that's what I'm going based off of, which I think is a much more like, it gives me an interesting perspective where I'm able to just watch the movies and judge it as a movie, not necessarily like coming from like the
extended canon.
Right, like I'm not judging it to like every little detail, like, oh wait, they didn't do this in the it's not like that for me. But this movie was also a little bit comedic, but nothing like what they're doing these days. So it kind of got a little bit excessive at points, but I think they did near what I would call the right amount of comedy, where it's not overly comedic, but at the same time it's still there and entertaining at the same time, and I like that.
Well, it's things like Captain America telling Iron Man language.
Shit! Language.
Little touches like that because it's true to the character, and it's true to who you know that they are.
Right.
And it just plays in perfectly.
It's not forced at all.
Exactly.
This is an agent of some kind.
Gentlemen, this is Laura. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, buddy. How you guys doing?
These are
Look at your face.
smaller agents.
So it just feels good, unlike some newer movies where it just feels like, oh gosh, no.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Just terrible. But we get introductions to meaningful, long-lasting characters as well. Wanda and Vision being some meaningful, long-lasting characters that we get in that movie. Yeah, that's the movie where they both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember, ironically, that scene where Vision picks Wanda up at the end, and they exchange one little look into each other's eyes. Ironically, that was the start of what became their romance in the future.
We also see in this movie that they kill off an important character, which I think is also an interesting perspective. Some people would be like, that doesn't really matter, but I think it's a bold move. We see Quicksilver dying at the end.
Yeah.
So that's obviously an interesting, like he's just appearing in the movie in the very beginning of the movie, already by the end of the movie dead.
And he was cool. He's a cool character.
Yeah, so it's a bold move, and a lot of movies these days don't do that. They keep their characters around. I definitely appreciate that in a movie more, because then it's not like predictable.
Right. Because then it gives you a little bit of reason to be on the edge of your seat, because your favorite characters could be at risk of potentially losing their life.
Right. And then I put a note in here. Avengers actually focus on saving people. I feel
Isn't
like
that crazy?
I feel like that's like the only movie where they actually like all put in an effort to be like rescuing.
This is S.H.I.E.L.D.?
This is what S.H.I.E.L.D.'s supposed to be.
This is not so bad.
People. All the other movies, it's like people are just like, you
Well,
know.
Civil War is a deconstruction of the Avengers themselves and be like, okay, the Avengers are a threat. They only want their own personal gain, and they're here to just wreck things left and right. So like you said, Age of Ultron is literally them going, look, we have to save people's lives. That's what our job is. So
Right.
I
and
totally agree.
isn't what's funny is I think Civil War is like the second movie that came out after Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
So like literally right after that, like they were just rescuing people. That's another one of the ones that I like a lot, Civil War, but obviously again not really underrated. Everybody kind of loves that movie quite a bit. I do have a couple of cons I just wanted to go over. Definitely the CGI is like everything is CGI in this movie. I noticed when I was trying to look at the details, like even the wooded scene in the beginning, which is my favorite scene in the movie, by the way, even the trees in the background are CGI. Everything's CGI. How hard would it be to just get these actors out in the woods and just like make a scene? You know what I mean? It would just look better if it was a little more practical. But obviously this is Marvel, and I think they do that for every movie, so it's not really exclusive for this one.
Right.
But definitely it would have been cooler with some practical effects, I think, for sure. Not even really effects, just like practical environment. There's no build up. Literally, like there's no build up at all because you're just jumping right into it, which is again like a pro and a con depending on how you look at it. And then an additional note, it seems like to me Age of Ultron and Civil War were like the last two movies, I would say, where it's like the old Marvel. Like I feel like they were still kind of like the original films, and then after those two is when it kind of hit like a new era for sure, and like a different vibe when you're watching the movies. Like I'd say there's now there's three like separate groups of movies, even though I know there's different phases and stuff, but just splitting them up into how it feels. There's like the early day ones, which again ends with Civil War and Age of Ultron in my opinion, and then we get kind of that everything until Endgame, and that was obviously good in its own way, but definitely different than those early films. And then now we're where we're at now, but it definitely has those nostalgic like old Marvel vibes that I definitely like.
I know you're not a big comic book fan, but it's still, to me, you know, coming from someone who has a little bit more comic book knowledge, I know a lot of people give it a lot of crap because of their predetermined opinions of it, but I personally felt like it was like you lifted them off the comic book page. I mean, even down to that one shot in the woods that you mentioned at the beginning where they're all together in the same shot. Is it practical? No. Does it look cool? Absolutely. And it looks like you ripped it right off the front page of a comic book. So I think, like you said, they keep that true to heart. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. So that's all I have for Age of Ultron, my most underrated Marvel movie out there, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, one thing I was going to ask you, what did you think of the Bruce and Natasha love dynamic?
So, you know, that's the one thing, like I said, it's like the cool Hulk again. Obviously, that's an exception right there where I'm like, that's not that cool, but it's still much better. I think like it's much better than what we have. You know, but
I think that's a big thing that tanked the movie for a lot of people is they didn't like that forced dynamic between Bruce and Natasha.
Yeah, it's kind of like they were already like trying to introduce like, oh, Hulk, you know, can be controlled a little bit, and like he can, you know, and then now obviously it's like he can fully just like be both at the same time. So that's like fully under control. But I think they were trying to already establish that a little bit. Ahead of time, it does feel forced and a little bit strange, but obviously I think, you know, looking at where it's ranked according to most people, when you look at just lists in general, what people think, even if you go on like IMDb or any of those websites where you can look at the rankings of all the Marvel movies, it's just too low. For having just some issues that people have problems with, definitely I would say there's some other movies that are ranked above it in most people's list that have like nothing really good to say about them for the most part compared to other Marvel movies. Like it's just too low in most cases, in my opinion.
All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and give you my most underrated Marvel movie ever. And I gave this a lot of thought and I had a lot of options, but I ended up settling on Thor from 2011. To me, this was the best visual interpretation from the comics that we've seen in live action. I think the decision in the director's case to feature, dare I say, a Shakespearean drama in a Marvel movie was something that I thought was really cool. Personally, I thought that they used humor very tastefully. There was that scene where, Thor throws his glass on the ground. He's like, this drink, I like it. Another. Throws it on the ground. Like you mentioned in your pick for your most underrated Marvel movie, the decision to use the humor to complement the character as opposed to letting the humor dictate the character.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
I thought that was very important because you've got a character like Thor who's a very straight and narrow, dare I say, over-serious actor, or not actor, but over-serious portrayal like Chris Hemsworth gave at the beginning. And you get this sense that he's very much a fish out of water when he comes to Earth. And so the humor that you get is the humor of him trying to adjust to life where it's not what he's used to. Things like going to the animal store trying to find a horse to ride and stuff like that. It's little funny things that we laugh at because it feels natural and not like, oh, I stubbed my toe, or hey, this guy's got a funny helmet on. I feel like when you get to that kind of a natural feeling humor, it hits a lot more for me. And overall, just the Shakespearean vibes that the whole movie gives off really fits the character well. You've got this grandiose atmosphere that they chose to mix with both practical and CGI effects. I think that was a great decision because in this day and age of Marvel movies where you're very quick to just be like, okay, here's green screen, here's blue screen, we'll just put everything in post-production. Their decision to use a hybrid and use actual physical, tangible set pieces that you can interact with as an actor, I think it really heightened the sense of wonderment that was Asgard. Because Asgard is a beautiful place. It was a beautiful place in the comics, and they really kept true to the vision of keeping this grand palace and world that is Asgard and all of its people. Personally, I think that this is one of those Marvel movies that really flies under the radar because you've got the early movies like Iron Man, Captain America, these blockbusters that were new for its time, and Thor just kind of hides among all of them because people don't really talk about his movie that much. And if you think about it, each one of those movies had their own specific niche that made them stand out. Think about it. So when I say Iron Man, the movie from 2008, what are the themes that come to your mind? Very basic. Think about like the what the movie represents. I'll give you a little kickstart. When I think of Iron Man, I think of Black Sabbath. I think of rock and roll, which kind of fits Tony Stark's vibe. And I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, they definitely play it good to his personality. And honestly, to answer your question, I would say like as a whole, it's like a comeback story. They take this guy that's super cocky, super rich, has everything in the world. They basically put him to rock bottom, obviously, and then he has to like rise back up. So it's more of like a comeback story, which is very unique to the entire series, I would say, and as a whole. And it just sets up his character for a really good start. And I think the whole MCU to a good start, honestly.
For sure. And then when I say Captain America, the first Avenger, what comes to your mind first when you think about the theme of that movie?
I think like old America, war movie.
1940s, the World War II, what do you call it, like the promos and stuff that they shot. Yeah, absolutely. So to draw a parallel to what you just mentioned, where it seemed like a coming of, like, not coming to age, but coming from the depths and rising above what you were predestined to be even greater than what you were before.
Right.
I think that's a perfect example of how each of those movies have those same themes. Iron Man, as you already mentioned. Captain America, he was at his lowest when he thought he was physically unable to perform in the military. He wasn't going to be able to go serve his country. Right. And in his mind, he was rock bottom. And so they took a man who was mentally and physically rock bottom and bringing him to new heights and giving him the super soldier serum and all that kind of stuff leads him to be the great leader and character that he is. I would go so far as to say the exact same thing happens to Thor. Because you got to think, at the very beginning of the movie, he's cocky. He's arrogant. These are all traits that we see in all of these early Marvel movies, but he has to get knocked down. He gets stripped of his power. He has to humble himself and relearn what it takes to be the king that he needs to be and the ruler that he needs to be. These are all technically the same beats, but they're all told in a different story. Iron Man, you think Black Sabbath, I do whatever I want. I'm a bad boy kind of thing. Captain America, you've got the period piece, the 1940 aspect, the, Star-Spangled Man with the plan. And you've got Thor, which is a Shakespearean drama with a little bit of love thrown in from like a really corny Hallmark show. So like they use these underlying themes to establish the leadership capacities that these characters have, but they use the accurate genre that fits that character. And I think that's why Thor, in my opinion, does a great job in portraying this character in the most accurate way it could, considering it was coming to live action.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with all those notes, and I'm a big fan of all the early early movies, that first phase. I really like all of them, so it's going to be easy for me to agree for sure. I'm thinking about it now as you're talking about it. It's interesting how you mentioned all three of those original films. They're all different. They're almost like appealing to different types of people.
Yeah.
Each movie, obviously, big Marvel fans will like all of them and to a certain extent, but it just does attract other people, especially people that aren't Marvel fans that are just coming to see the movie purely based on it's just a movie and they're going to the theaters to see it. They don't have any background with Marvel. But it's interesting how they use that almost. It's almost genius. They use that to target different people, and then in Avengers they bring it all together
Exactly.
to just make the big bucks.
Because you got to think, like my wife, for example. My wife right now is a hardcore MCU fan. She loves the MCU. She's actually expressed desire to get into the comics because she's seen my passion for it. And she's like, well, if you're into it and I love the movies, then I gotta be into this. What got her started into the MCU was Captain America. And why was that? My wife loves period pieces. She loves 1940s type of movies. I'm forgetting the exact genre, but more of like the old school gosh gee, golly whiz kind of character. And so I think that's why she fell in love with Captain America, the first Avenger. And like you said, that opened the door for her into all of the other characters, and that's where it began for her. So I think, like you said, everybody can see themselves in these characters or see a genre they like, and it gets them hyped to the point where they want to go to see stuff like Avengers, and you get that emotional payoff. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning into this particular topic. Guys, we're so excited to show you what's coming up next week. Ashton, thank you so much for being a part of this segment.
Oh, thanks for having me. Guys, be sure to tune in, please, because the next one's going to be pretty controversial, I'm just going to say.
Yeah, we're either going to make some more friends or maybe find some people that may not agree with what we're going to be discussing. But you know what? That's going to be the fun part. Can't wait to see you guys next week.